John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. There's been so much discussion about this audit going on with Arizona's election, particularly the results out of Maricopa County, which is Arizona's most populous county. They're pouring over 2.1 million votes. 7 months after the November election is over, these 2.1 million ballots are under audit at Arizona's Veterans Memorial Coliseum. The Arizona State Senate called for this audit to resolve continued accusations from President Trump and his supporters that the 2020 election was stolen. And even a bigger question, was there any kind of falderall in this election at all? The Arizona Senate put up $150,000 in funding, but the cost for the audit could run into the millions. Joining me now is the Senate's point man for the election audit. He's the former Secretary of State here in Arizona, Ken Bennett. Ken, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Good to be with you, if this is really being with you, but we'll do the best we can by Zoom.
Exactly. Okay, first question. Do you regret taking this role?
No.
You've taken a lot of flack.
No, I don't regret this. It's very misunderstood as to why we're doing the audit, but I believe that Arizona wins no matter what happens. If we find out that everything went pretty well in the audit and the results are confirmed and there's nothing to really do better, then Arizona wins. If we find out that there are some things that could have been done better and should be done better and fixed before the next election, then we'll do that and we win that way too.
And we need to point out, none of this is going to overturn the election. I mean, It has been certified in the Senate and the House. It is done. It is a fait accompli. Joe Biden is the president, and nothing you guys do will change that.
That's correct. And everyone needs to understand that. And I think that's why the Senate was able to get a Maricopa Superior Court judge to rule in favor of allowing them to subpoena the election materials, not to go backwards, but to go forward and see if there's anything related to elections in Arizona that we need to improve to make sure that people aren't lurching back and forth every 4 years to accusing the other side of having stolen the election. In 2016, there were a lot of Democrats complaining about the election being stolen when Trump beat Clinton. And now you kind of have the opposite going on. We cannot have that happening. And that was a very important part of why the Senate did this, not to go backwards, but to make sure Arizonans have confidence in their elections going forward.
Now, the election, after the election was over, there were recounts done, right? That is something that happens after every election.
A very small recount. Every county is supposed to hand count between 1% and 2% of the ballots. Maricopa chose the lowest number, and Maricopa hand counted about 8,000 of the 2.1 million ballots that were hand counted or that were counted in the election. They only counted 8,000, and the other 2.1 million ballots were never looked at again. And they also talk about these other two audits that they had. That was two companies that came in and looked at the machines to make sure that there wasn't any evidence that they had been tampered with or were connected to the internet. But those second and third audits, as they call them, they weren't really audits. They're called logic and accuracy tests on the equipment. But those second and third audits, if you want to call them that, did not look at one single ballot.
Now, my understanding is that there is a photograph on the Dominion machines. There is a photograph taken, an image taken of every ballot cast. Is that correct?
That is.
Why wouldn't we have just taken those images, which you would think are foolproof, and have a company count those up and look at those instead of doing this? And we'll show the video of it. I think it's video number 12, and having this bizarre Lazy Susan thing going on at Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Why not just take the original work and match it up?
Well, there's always wonder whether any election company's equipment captures the images correctly, or is there anything messing with how they captured the images, and then the tabulation of the votes from those images. So I think the Senate wanted to kind of get a hand count, a human confirmation as to whether the votes on the actual ballots themselves match up to the votes that the Dominion machines counted from the images that they took as they were scanned through those machines. We also, though, are considering just what you described, which would be a second tabulation of the Dominion images. And if we do that with a company completely independent from the current auditors, we would really have three tabulations. One, the Dominion tabulation in November. Two, the hand count that they're doing at the Coliseum right now. And three would be an independent second tabulation of the votes from the images that Dominion captured. So there's nothing wrong with that, with having three data points.
Do you believe that there is something untoward in the election 2020?
I have no knowledge of that yet, John. But I think it's important to understand just how close the election was. And when you're ready to do so, I have a little PowerPoint that we want to go to.
Okay, I'm going to ask our audience to bear with us here, but this may be helpful. Let's hope. Go ahead, Ken, if you want to take it, and we'll just try to explain.
I want your audience to consider that. What if we were 1,000 people in Arizona? That's what a shire used to be in Old England. When 1,000 people lived in one place, it was called a shire, like Devonshire or Yorkshire. Let's call it Arizona Shire. The head of the shire was an earl. The chief law enforcement officer was the reef. That's where we get the word sheriff, by the way, shire, reef. But if Arizona was 1,000 people and 80% of us voted, as we did last time, then here's how close the election was. We'll call it Bob, but it wasn't really Bob. Bob got 401, that's Biden, and Tom got 399. If our election was 800 people, that's how close the presidential election was in Arizona. That's 0.3%. That's exactly the margin between Biden and Trump in Arizona in 2020. Now, if you were the loser or the winner in that election, 2 votes, you would probably want to ask the election director of the Arizona Shire, are you really? I mean, how can you help make me confident that that is really the actual results? And that election director would tell you, well, here's some more information about the election. We had 708 people vote by mail, and we had 100 people come to the polls. Well, then you'd say, wait a minute, that's 808. You just told me there were 800 votes. Well, that would start you thinking about 4 uns. And the first one, is there anything uncounted? And as you can see at the bottom there, maybe somebody circled their oval or put a check next to it. And in the actual Arizona election, we have over 33,000 Arizona voters that the machines didn't record any vote for anyone for president. Maybe it's situations like that where they circled the oval or checked next to the oval instead of marking anything inside the oval. Another un that would be to look at the envelopes that most of the voters voted by mail. Are all of those envelopes signed? Maybe we have 680 envelopes, but 20 of them aren't signed at all. And that's the voter's affidavit that they are actually casting that ballot. Another un would be, are the ballots that were mailed back and forth, are they folded? Is there any other aspect related to the ballot that helps us confirm or dispel its authenticity? And then a last un would be, is there anything unaccounted for? When they mailed out the ballots, they probably mailed out more than they got back, of course. And some of those had to be returned undelivered. People have moved, people have died. Have all of those been accounted for? And then the last 2 things that we're looking at is the machines. Were they connected to the internet? Were they using the correct software? Is there anything related to the machines? And then the last one is any registration anomalies. And that's, are there 50 people voting from an address in Glendale when it's a 2-bedroom house or something? Or are dead people voting? Or any of those types of anomalies? So if you bring it down to 800 people out of 1,000, which is what happened in Arizona, 80%, this is what happened in the election. And this is why when you are talking about an election that was 2 out of 800, the margin of victory was 2 out of 800. These are the kinds of things that I think you would want to look for.
Okay, now, Ken, let's go back to you full screen here. If you were to find that there are anomalies that fall within that margin of error, what would be the remedy, say, for Donald Trump?
I don't think there would be any remedy going backwards. The only remedy would be, for example, if we find a bunch of envelopes that were not signed, then we need to tighten our rules and procedures going forward for the 2022 election to make sure that every envelope is checked for a signature. And if there's not a valid signature of a voter on that envelope, then it doesn't even get opened and the ballot inside counted.
You were Secretary of State. You went through all this before. I mean, we've never taken this deep of a dive on it. And I suspect it's because the Republicans, even though it's narrow, have a majority in the Senate, not by much, by one vote, basically, that we would take this kind of deep dive. Do you suspect that no matter what happens, Democrats and people who've been critical of this process, that no one would trust anything that comes from it?
From the audit?
Yes. In other words, there's been so much criticism that no matter what were to come of this, if anything did, that it would be discounted out of hand, saying this thing was a sham, it was a mockery, we don't trust the result.
Well, it's very interesting, John, that if you look, and I'm just going to hold this up so that your voters can kind of see it. This is one of the brochures from the Dominion voting system for their Democracy Suite voting system. And it has 4 pieces to the election. One is building the election. The next is voting and counting the ballots. 3 is reporting the results. The 4th and of 4 phases of a Dominion-run election is auditing the election. Now, the first rule in auditing is you can't audit yourself. So if the Dominion election system has as one of its 4 phases of an election, auditing the election, what's wrong with auditing the election? They contemplate that in their own marketing materials. And I believe that when all is said and done, if people will give the auditors a chance to do their job, that we will confirm the results one way or the other. I actually believe that machines count the votes on the ballots very accurately. I'm the only Secretary of State in the history of Arizona that ever had to oversee a statewide recount. And we recounted almost 2 million ballots back in 2010, and the vote totals changed by 12. So we may find that maybe the machines did count the votes very accurately, but maybe the problem is in the signature boxes that were missing from a certain percentage of the envelopes.
So you are pushing back on, and I'll play it. We had Katie Hobbs, by the way, for people who are wondering about equal time. We had Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State, on talking about this a few weeks ago. She had the same amount of time you're having today. Let's play her sound from a few weeks ago. I want you to respond.
Okay.
What we are seeing here is politicians who have continued to use the misinformation and baseless conspiracy theories from the election to carry out a political agenda. They are the ones undermining voters' confidence, and this process is continuing to do that.
Well, my response is exactly the opposite. This is not undermining our democracy. This is confirming in people's minds that they can believe the elections as having been done accurately, fairly, and transparently. That's what we have to convince our citizens of, that the votes were counted correctly, that the people who were allowed and authorized to vote were the only ones that were allowed to vote, and that the machines worked, and that the votes were all counted correctly and accurate. I don't think that undermines our election. I think it does exactly the opposite. It helps confirm in the minds of a lot of people who are concerned about whether this election was done correctly, that they can feel comfortable that it was. Then they can know that, okay, their candidate lost. We need a better candidate, or our candidate needs a better message, or whatever they might conclude thereafter. But we cannot lurch from 4 years ago to this time, where 4 years ago in 2016, you had a lot of Democrats saying that there was some fraud in the 2016 election, or Trump could have never have beaten Clinton. Now you've got kind of the opposite going on, and we are going to rip our country apart if people cannot believe in and trust their elections. So I believe we're doing exactly what Katie Hobbs is warning against. We are not diminishing our democracy. We are strengthening it, and Arizona will win no matter what the outcome. If we confirm that the election was done fairly and transparently and accurately, then that's a win for Arizona. If we find that there were some problems that need to be fixed before the next election, then that's a win for Arizona too. It has nothing to do with trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election.
And one more thing, you think that the citizenry will accept what you are doing down there at Veterans Memorial Coliseum? You don't think that there's already a pall cast over this whole thing where they won't accept whatever you might find?
Well, there are people certainly like Katie Hobbs and many of the boards of supervisors that are trying to cast that pall over it already. But it was Secretary of State Hobbs who first started calling it a fraud and all kinds of other things. Why are they so afraid of auditing election, which is the fourth of the four steps that Dominion says should happen to their elections anyway? What are they afraid of? If there was nothing to hide, what problem is going to be found out through an audit?
Ken, when will it be over?
We will have the ballots hand counted and evaluated for their authenticity. It's called paper evaluation. We have till the end of June here at Veterans Memorial Coliseum. We are on track, in fact, maybe even a little ahead of track to have it done by the end of June. There's some other pieces to the audit, that second tabulation that I mentioned. We also want to look at some of the ballot envelopes, make sure that they were signed. There's some registration anomalies that could be checked out. We're still waiting for Maricopa County to give us the second passwords to the machines so that we can get into the setup part of the machines and check and make sure that they weren't connected to the internet and other things. But all of that will take a few more weeks after June 30th. And I think we'll have a final report, a comprehensive forensic final report, first of its kind, probably several weeks after the hand count is finished by the end of June.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Former Secretary of State Ken Bennett, the Senate liaison for the recount going on at Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Thank you for that. I think it at least explains kind of what you have on your plate, what's at play. So thank you for that, Ken. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday.
John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Welcome back. It is 400 plus days away from the Arizona primary for governor and everything else. But the field for governor this week to replace Doug Ducey, who, by the way, is term limited, has expanded quite a bit. A bunch of people are in, and here to handicap the field, political consultant Chuck Coughlin. He was former Governor Fife Symington's deputy chief of staff and the head of Governor Brewer's transition team. And a long time ago, we worked on the McCain campaign. Chuck, good to see you.
Great to see you, John.
Okay, let's run it down. The Republican side is kind of interesting because you've got so many names. Let's start with Kimberly Yee. First Chinese American elected to statewide office, first Chinese American, I believe, elected to the state legislature. Tell me about Kimberly Yee and her chances in this race.
Well, articulate state treasurer has run on a statewide basis. And so it's something she's familiar with, although the step from treasurer to governor is a giant step. Served in the legislature, was a majority leader in the state Senate, has substantial political relationships in the state. She released a list of 25 endorsers the other day. And she has a pretty savvy DC political consulting firm working on her behalf. So I would expect her to be competitive. And as you said, John, she's an Asian American. At this point, that's a very attractive thing to be in an election.
Yeah, and she knows financial stuff, obviously, because, that's her job. She's the treasurer and worked in that office for quite a bit of time, and she's a small business person as well. Right now, Chuck, for somebody like Kimberly Yee, how tough is it to get your message out this early?
Well, it is early. Let's all admit that. We haven't even gotten it done with this legislative session yet, much less the next one. These campaigns need to mature, and what they really need to focus on right now is endorsements. They need to focus on developing a significant fundraising list to get them by the end of the year a significant amount of money in their campaign coffers so that next year they can begin to execute. And when next year starts is when the electorate really starts to pay attention, maybe around springtime. And so you're executing towards that early ballot drop, which will be early August of 22.
Yeah, and then it's a sprint to the general. Let me go to Karen Taylor Robeson. She's on the Board of Regents. We don't know a lot about her, but she's been around as well. We'll roll tape of her. What thoughts, impressions?
Legacy family in Arizona politics. Her father, Carl Kanasic, was a Senate president the chairman of the Hopi Navajo Relocation Commission when that was still in existence. A terrific guy. Her brother was a 22-year veteran of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors during that very troubled era when Arpaio and the county attorney were working against the Board of Supervisors. One of the nicest people on the planet.
No relation to Robeson, the home builder.
Married to Ed Robeson.
Okay,
so
that is
significant amount of resources there. She was the chairman of the fund for the re-election of state legislators this last time. Very successful at fundraising last time and defending the majorities in the state Senate. Very well connected with the Republican Party.
Okay, let me get. We're going to run short on time. Let's get to Kari Lake, my former colleague here. Is it better to be an outsider in this cycle? Kari Lake's an outsider.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the core of the Republican Party right now. Not being an insider, she fits that bill. Although she's also got the best name ID in the race, John, by virtue of being on your station for 20 plus years, or the vet. And so you introduced to her instantaneously a welcoming figure in your living room, a trustworthy source of information. And so she starts off the race in the best position.
No kidding. She would be the front runner right now.
If it was just purely based on name ID, absolutely.
Okay, there are some other names that are being bandied about. By the way, I should mention J.D. Hayward. There's a history here at Channel 10 of people coming out of here and winning races. J.D. Hayward served in the U.S. House for 12 years. Matt Salmon, there's discussion Matt Salmon's going to jump in.
Yeah, Matt, former congressman, former state legislator, former congressman, two-time congressman, ran and then resigned to pursue other careers, and then ran again, was reelected, defeated Kirk Adams, the former Speaker of the House, in a primary, and now is working at ASU as the head of government relations for Dr. Crow. Fluent in Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, did his mission in China, has significant contacts in the conservative community, endorsed Andy Biggs and gave Andy Biggs his opportunity to win that congressional seat.
Has he been out of it too long?
Well, you wouldn't definitely call him an outsider, right? He's definitely an insider.
Many years in Congress.
About Kari.
Yeah.
Many years in Congress. And he was always well liked by his constituency, always well liked for his constituent services, but not an outsider. Definitely
okay, let me get to the final one. We're going to go to the Democratic side. Is Katie Hobbs the odds-on favorite for the Democratic nomination?
Well, with the narrative that the Republicans are building for her, absolutely. I mean, she's on national news programs every night. She's the current Secretary of State, which is usually an ignominious position, somebody you don't really know. But given the controversy around the election cycle and her prevalence in criticizing the Senate audit and certifying the last election with Governor Ducey, yes, I mean, tremendous name ID, a former legislator, a social service worker, well-liked, not a lot of experience on, being as Jan found out when she became governor, not being a Secretary of State's not being a governor.
Yeah.
It's
Quickly,
a very line item job.
We got 10 seconds. Anybody else who might jump in? We've got the former mayor in Nogales, but he's not doing much polling wise so far. Anybody else?
Marco Lopez
Yes.
on the Democratic side. Aaron Lieberman, a state legislator on the Democratic side, has talked about it. On the Republican side, we've not talked about Steve Gaynor, who I believe is going to run. He lost to Katie Hobbs in the Secretary of State's race in 2018. Businessman, very wealthy, and very articulate.
Yeah, so, well, we're gonna have to leave it there because we're out of time, but we at least hit kind of the waterfront. We set the table, and we're going to have you back. Chuck, thank you.
Always a pleasure, John.
Good seeing you. Chuck Coughlin, and we're back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Appreciate you joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. If you cannot watch it live, here's a link, and we want to put this up. You can pass it on to your friends, relatives, whatever. Fox10phoenix.com/newsmaker. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.